The Palestinian Liberation Organization is to be represented at the forthcoming United Nations debate on Palestine. The General Assembly voted late this afternoon to admit representatives from the PLO for the debate. Only 4 countries, including Israel and the United States, voted against the motion. 105 were in favor. Canada was one of 20 countries which abstained. The U.S.
The United Nations took a step today that could have far-reaching consequences. The General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to allow the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, to represent the Palestinian people. They'll do that in a major debate on Palestine next month. Israel angrily denounced the move as a surrender to murder and barbarism. But in spite of Israeli protests, the vote to admit the PLO passed with 105 countries in favor and only 4 against. A PLO representative who watched the vote was almost ecstatic.
This resolution means that the United Nations recognizes the Palestinian people as the principal party to the Palestine question, that it recognizes that the Palestine Liberation Organization is the representative of the Palestinian people, and that really in essence means that the United Nations is taking the first important step towards affirming the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and of putting the Palestinian people at the heart of the Palestine question, a long overdue situation.
The Israeli ambassador told the Assembly it would be welcoming people who had turned the premeditated murder of innocent children, women, and men into a profession.
The government of Israel will protect its citizens from the nefarious crimes of the PLO. It will continue to take all the necessary measures to put an end to these crimes. It will continue to strike at the PLO terrorists and at their bases.
20 countries abstained from the voting, and Canada was among them. The 4 that voted no were Israel, the United States, the Dominican Republic, and Bolivia.
The hostage siege in Uganda ends dramatically.
This is Israel broadcasting from Jerusalem. Here is a special news broadcast. All the hostages in Uganda have been rescued by Israeli forces. I repeat, the hostages held for more than a week by Arab terrorists in Entebbe, Uganda, have been rescued and are being flown home by the Israel army.
That broadcast, only a matter of hours ago, caused surprise and disbelief around the world. Israeli commandos flew 2,000 miles to Entebbe Airport in Uganda to rescue more than 100 hostages held in Uganda for a week after a hijacking.
Israel acted with the cooperation of the Kenyan government. The Israeli aircraft stopped at Nairobi Airport on their way back to Tel Aviv.
This early dispatch from Michael Elkins in Jerusalem described the commando attack in detail.
The Israeli force, mostly paratroopers and including a special anti-terrorist commando unit and a number of senior officers from various units, flew directly from Israel to Entebbe Airport in 3 American Hercules long-range military transport planes. As the planes approached Entebbe Airport, they are said to have dropped heavy explosive charges at a far end of the airport in order to divert and unbalance soldiers of the 2 Ugandan battalions stationed there. These Ugandan soldiers are said to have taken over from the hijackers the duty of guarding the hostages as part of President Amin's cooperation with the hijackers. The Israeli aircraft came down at maximum landing speed. The soldiers raced to the airport lounge where the hostages were being held. There was a brief exchange of fire, during which all the terrorists were killed. The hostages, the French air crew, and the Israeli soldiers rushed back to the planes and took off. The entire operation is said to have taken no more than half an hour. There are some reports that a number of Ugandan soldiers were also killed. The news of the rescue operation came as a great and very welcome surprise to people here, who learned of it only on the early morning radio bulletins. Last Thursday, it had been officially announced that the government had, as the announcement put it, decided to open negotiations for the release of all the hostages with a readiness to release prisoners. The reference being to prisoners held for terrorist acts in Israel, whose release had been demanded by the hijackers. And it was generally accepted here that there was no other alternative. Official sources are saying that the government fully intended to negotiate and decided upon the rescue operation only on Friday, when it became evident that the hijackers were demanding the release of their entire list of 47 prisoners held by the Israelis, plus others imprisoned in Germany and in Kenya. Nevertheless, there is other information from foreign sources which indicates that the operational plan was approved by the cabinet and set in train last Thursday, and that the cooperation of the Kenyan government was secured by an Israeli emissary shortly thereafter. That the government's announced decision to negotiate was a cover for the planned operation.
As the hostages arrived in Israel, there were scenes of jubilation.
One of them described awaiting reporters the scene of the rescue. He says he was sleeping at the time.
I don't know what to say, because it was like in a nightmare. And in a nightmare you can't describe your sensation.
Did Israeli soldiers take you and put you on the plane?
Please, I cannot speak for the moment.
Are you an Israeli or French?
An Israeli. Yes.
What can you tell us about the week you spent in Uganda? How was it?
The week I spent in Uganda? Nothing special.
What was the
Like a prisoner.
Were you badly
The
treated?
treatment was not so bad, except some two terrorists, or one especially.
The woman?
Inhuman. But except his, I can't say that the treatment was inhuman.
How many terrorists were there?
I think between 8 and 10.
What was the single worst moment of this whole week for you?
Not one, many.
But on
The
Thursday,
warning. First of all, the warning. The warning to be killed if Israel will not accept the conditions, you know.
what do you think would happen if Israel had not come through with this rescue operation? What do you think would have happened to you and the other hostages?
I don't know.
What did you think in that moment? What did you feel in the moment when the Israelis came down and freed you?
Nothing. You cannot feel anything. You cannot feel anything. You are in such a state that you can't think.
President Carter says it's difficult to judge if Israel should remain quiet under attack and if the retaliatory action was excessive. But at his news conference today, the president warned that the Middle East is teetering on the brink of a major conflict because of the violence in Lebanon and the absence of peace talks. He said Israel and the Arabs should start talking immediately about problems blocking a settlement. Mr. Carter thanked Israel for accepting an American working paper on resuming the Geneva talks, and he praised President Sadat of Egypt for saying yesterday that he was ready to go anywhere to get negotiations started. Prime Minister Begin also welcomed Mr. Sadat's statement, adding that he has already said that he too is willing to go anywhere to negotiate.
A group calling...
President Sadat, in a surprise move, told the packed parliamentary chamber that he would go to the ends of the earth, even to the Knesset in Jerusalem, in order to negotiate a settlement based on total Israeli withdrawal from all the occupied territories and the establishment of a Palestinian state. He charged that Israel had placed procedural blocks in the path of the Geneva Conference. But he said, Egypt is unconcerned about procedure, and he would be willing to accept any format that would bring about the reconvening of the Geneva Parley. Nonetheless, the president noted it was necessary to properly prepare the groundwork for the conference in advance, so that it will not degenerate into a verbal slugging match. While his comments on procedure were directed towards Israel by name, he also implied strongly that they were designed to get around the fact that there is still no unified Arab position on how the Geneva Conference should be run. For that reason, He rejected the idea of yet another Arab Summit conference now, although he did say that he would soon be going to Damascus to discuss a joint position with Syrian President Hafez al-Assad. Geneva, Mr. Sadat noted, was not an end in itself, but a way of forcing Israel to choose, in his words, between peace based on justice or confrontation whose effects cannot be forecast. Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin this morning welcomed Mr. Sadat's offer to come to Jerusalem. He said that he hoped the president's remarks were not mere rhetoric, and reminded the president that he had earlier offered to go to Cairo. However, the Israeli leader categorically rejected again both total Israeli withdrawal and the establishment of a separate Palestinian state. Neither side, he said, should hold up preconditions of this sort before the conclave begins. Nonetheless, said Mr. Begin, Egypt could raise these issues in Geneva, just as Israel could raise any issues she wanted to. This is Jim Letterman in Jerusalem.
Today, Anwar Sadat's historic visit to Israel. Ben Gurion Airport, Israel, and one of the most historic moments in modern history. President Anwar al-Sadat of Egypt becomes the first Arab leader to set foot on Israeli soil since the creation of the Jewish state almost 30 years ago. Correspondents and commentators were moved to say, "We are witnessing the impossible." And then, that incredible moment, the playing of the Egyptian national anthem. The visit has raised enormous
that the Israelis and people all over the world were hoping would emerge during President Sadat's appearance before the assembled parliamentarians in his historic visit to the Knesset.
Applause in the Knesset is unprecedented.
חברי הכנסת, ברוח חזונו של הנביא ישעיהו בן עמוס,
member of the Knesset, as the prophet Isaiah said, and welcome our honored guest, the President of the Arab Republic, Anwar Sadat. We welcomed him to come to the Knesset and to say his words here. We will listen to him with hope. I'm asking the President of Egypt to say his words.
You wish to live amongst us in this part of the world, and we tell you with all sincerity that we welcome you amongst us with all safety and security. This in itself constitutes a tremendous turning point in contemporary history. We rejected you in the past. We had our reasons for this, yes, We refused to meet with you anywhere. Yes. We used to describe you as the so-called Israel. True. We used to attend conferences and participate in international organizations. Our representatives did not and continue not to exchange words of greeting. Yes, this did occur and continues to occur. Yes, this did take place. But I tell you today, and I declare to the world at large, that we accept to live with you within a just and lasting peace. We do not want to surround you or that you surround us with rockets aimed at destruction or the missiles of prejudice and hatred. I call for peace and I strive for it, ladies and gentlemen.
Sunday morning producer Michael Crampton has been tracking down witnesses to this atrocity throughout the night.
Yuri Dan is a well-known Israeli journalist and also the co-author of the best-selling book on one of Israel's finest hours, 90 Minutes at Entebbe. He was at the scene of the massacre within minutes, 1.7 kilometers outside Tel Aviv, on the main highway from Tel Aviv to Haifa.
It was already evening, twilight, when the bus with the terrorists arrived at a roadblock around 5 kilometers from the center of Tel Aviv. And at that moment, the Israeli policemen who tried to block the car were shooting at the wheels of the bus. And the terrorists who put the explosives inside the bus jumped out, and the citizens, the civilians, the children and the women and the fathers and the mothers in the car just got killed on place.
Like most Israeli journalists, Uri Dan has been no stranger to bloodshed and shooting. Yet the scene he witnessed, where the Egged Company tour bus with its load of holidaying families had been blown apart, has deeply affected him. I spoke to him at 4 this morning, Israel time.
I cannot forget the image of a father coming out of the bus with his son on his hands, shot, killed a 7 years or 8 years old boy on his hands and saying, "I have no more, I lost him, I don't know what happened to me." And this image of the father and his son is still shocking me, although I was in several wars, and it just came as thunder in a bright day. And we had today, Saturday, yesterday, it was a beautiful spring day in Israel. Sun red was just going into the sea, into the horizon, and it was a surrealistic or Kafkaesque scene. I don't know how to describe it. I have not digested it yet.
You sound very shocked yourself.
Yes, I am. But then when we come back to ourselves, this is Israel. There is a price for having a Jewish state and independent Israel. There is a price for it, it seems to be. So maybe it brought us back to our reality.
The Palestinians.
About 30 people are dead and 60 have been wounded in a guerrilla raid on an Israeli bus just north of Tel Aviv. Israeli radio says the attack was made by Palestinian commandos who landed in rubber boats. They seized hostages on a bus which later exploded on the coastal highway. The area has been sealed off and the Israelis have given no further details. At the same time, Palestinian spokesmen in Beirut are claiming that the raid is a much larger conflict. They say their guerrillas are engaged in heavy fighting with Israeli troops in the area. and they claim to have killed at least 33 Israeli soldiers. The Israeli Premier Menachem Begin has delayed his trip to Washington because of today's incident. And in Washington, President Carter has denounced the guerrilla attack as an act of senseless brutality.
We have a report from the scene from CBS News.
Shooting their way from the commandeered bus, the terrorists paused only long enough to hurl grenades at the vehicle, trapping untold numbers of their hostages in the burning skeleton. For 15 minutes, Israeli army and police reinforcements exchanged gunfire with the guerrillas. The bodies of 2 terrorists were found in the brush 60 feet from the highway. A third, who survived, was quickly interrogated and then carried to the roadway where doctors worked to save his life. Efforts to rescue the Israelis trapped in the fiery bus were futile. Bodies were burned beyond all recognition.
And in the aftermath of the battle, an intensive air and ground search for any of the terrorists who may have escaped. Flares have been dropped from overhead, lighting the ground below. There are helicopters with searchlights, and on the ground there are troops with search dogs.
The pursuit was as frenetic as it was intensive. Armed civilian patrols were called out to man roadblocks and patrol the sea to cut off any possible route of escape. Hospitals from Haifa to Tel Aviv took in the wounded and the dead and broadcast appeals for blood donations. The ultimate intent of the guerrillas remains unclear, though 2 theories persist. First, that they intended to make their way to the heart of Tel Aviv to open fire and lob grenades at the usually heavy Sabbath day crowds. And second, that they meant to shoot and bomb their way to Ben Gurion Airport, where they planned to hijack a plane to make their escape. What is clear is that scores of unsuspecting Israelis did not escape. Some had been on tour buses headed home after a holiday. Others were walking along the side of Israel's main highway, the Haifa Road. Tonight, a road of death, where the aftermath of terror was marked by seemingly endless trips by rescue workers, carrying body bags to be filled. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
The World at 6. Good evening from CBC News. This is Ken Haslam with Judy Madron. Here are the headlines. Israeli retaliation has begun. Israeli troops have crossed into southern Lebanon. Canadian unemployment passes the 1 million mark. There are demands in the Commons for emergency action, but the House...
Planes have now joined in the attack on the big camp, Rashadir. You can hear the gunfire in the area now. The planes are very high indeed. As the guns open up again on an Israeli plane flying so high that I can't see it, I can see also an Israeli warship just off the coast, clearly within sight, but it is not joining in the fire at the moment. However, the Israeli ships have been lying offshore perhaps a few miles and have been pounding the Palestinian camps in the neighborhood steadily all through the hours of darkness. Now that we're in daylight, the planes have taken up the attack where the ships have left off. Diving very low now. Taking evasive action now. Going very high now. Planes seem to be aiming for targets due south of us at a headland some miles away, and also in the hills to the east. Cannot see the exact targets to the south because the headlands is covered in mist that's come into the sea in the last few hours. Earlier we could see the high ground on this headland was the target of Israeli shells. We can see them bursting on the skyline. The only sound to be heard now is the breaking of the surf on this beautiful Mediterranean beach. This is Hal Jones, CBC News, near Tyre in southern Lebanon.
PLO